There's only one thing that doesn't need to change, but it's not a thing, it's a person, his name is God. The rest of us should be hungry for change.
Dear diary, today I feel very sad and I want to eat everything.
The problem is that we are not eating food anymore. We are eating food like products. And they're adorned. They're made to look better and smell better so that people are attracted to them.
It's not fault. You're programmed to put on fat whenever there is food available. But now, there's a lot of food available, but it's the wrong kind.
Sugar is in everything. In America, we're eating about 22 teaspoons of sugar a day.
Even the milk hasn't escaped. So, let me just show you. One kid, just for 5 years of elementary school, sugar, just from milk.
You might as well just be rolling up the kid's sleeves and putting in heroin, because it's the same.
The marketing essentially lies to you because it presents you with the promise you're going to be sexy and popular and cool, but in reality, you're going to be obese and miserable and sick.
Nothing else does it in your brain quite like a Diet Cola. And that's because there's a deadly combination there of aspartame and caffeine.
I think one can believe the FDA actually has their own scientists that do this analysis, but nothing could be further from the truth.
If I was in the food industry, what am I looking to do? I want to sell you more food. They're into just selling a market.
You can lose weight on a diet, but it's a little bit like borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. I mean, you can get 10 pounds off your body from sheer force, but you're going to have to pay back with interest.
People know this, so why are highly intelligent people not stop them? Because they don't know the nature of the trap.
The whole dieting paradigm is flawed.
I was 31 when I realized I don't know how to take care of myself and I am sick. So I had to go back and learn all the things I wish I had known as a child.
I tried everything. I did witch doctors, I did mud baths, actually I did a lot. The one thing which I was really afraid to face up to was changing what I put into my mouth.
Never heard of a raw food restaurant. Raw food, how do you cook raw food? I thought vegan was a planet.
I'm sort of blind. And had very bad sleep apnea. I was borderline type 2 diabetic.
Cleansing and detoxification will make you lose weight, will make your eyes white, will make your skin glow.
If somebody's got beautiful skin, it invites us to a deeper understanding about what's going on inside their body.
What we're talking about is a real diet in the sense of what a species eats. When we get onto our real diet, we don't have to think about these things anymore.
What do you think the body's going to do? It's not going to reject this at all. It's going to look and say, now I'm on board. Now you're good to me, let me shine for you.
Who are we shining for? Yeshua. God is with us. He's the one that saves us, heals us, and delivers us. It's actually out of Scripture where he talks about us working out our salvation. The word salvation means to be saved, to be healed. So healing is something that is automatic in the kingdom. It's automatic in creation. We just have to realize if we're missing healing, we're missing something. And maybe there's too much of something that's oppressing us. It can be spiritual, mental, emotional, but definitely I found out that through the transformation of what I was eating, by eliminating those processed toxic foods, that healing started to happen in my body. That young lady that said, she's diagnosed with cancer at age 31. She said, I just realized I didn't know how to take care of myself. I had to learn how to take care of myself. Because it's not taught in schools. The school propaganda is pushed by those that have the most money to influence the legislators with their lobbyists, right? And to force lies onto us like drinking milk. It's a lie. The mammals are not called to drink milk after the age of 6. By age 6, you lose an enzyme in your stomach called renin that is designed to actually digest milk, mother's milk, from your mother. So mammals, we're the only mammal that is crazy enough to drink milk from another species. Now, it probably started back in the day when mothers had a difficult time producing milk, and they didn't know that they could consume fenugreek or that they can consume chaste tree berry, and they lost that wisdom, and so they had to rely on maybe goat's milk, which is similar to mother's milk, but it still has some things that have digestive issue. But for infants, once you become an adult, the proteins you can't assimilate, your body is reactive, your immune system is reactive to some 25 different proteins in milk, casein being one of them. And so that reactivity causes autoimmune reactivity that can cause type 1 diabetes. Number one cause of type 1 diabetes, based on the studies, is the consumption of milk. Cow's milk. So, notmilk.com is your resource, and you can find out how much allowable pus and blood is in every carton of milk. Because these animals that they milk with mechanical milking machines, and that they feed antibiotics because they're always infected, because if you had something that was cutting into your body constantly, into the udder of that animal, there's bleeding, there's infection, and with infection comes that pus. So the FDA had to decide, well, how much pus and blood can we allow to be in milk and still be what they consider safe? Well, let's just throw a number out there. How many parts per million? We don't know. So who makes those decisions and doesn't tell us about it, right?
Well, even in raw milk, because raw milk cow's milk is popular now. But still, because actually a cow has 4 stomachs. So the more stomachs you have, the more breaking down of the fats and the proteins. So we're not cows, so it's just more difficult for us to break down those fats and proteins, even if it's raw milk. And a lot of people's concern is, well, what about the calcium for our children? And what about, their teeth and their bones? And our kids are a great experiment project years ago, because they were raised without dairy. They were completely dairy-free. But there's also the dairy products on our shelves in the grocery stores are pasteurized and homogenized. And that process, actually, any minerals in that were organic have become inorganic. So those minerals are not even depositing into our bones and strengthening them. So this country has one of the highest consumption rates of dairy products, but then also one of the highest rates of osteoporosis. And so my mom, and that was a generational, my grandmother had it, my mother had it, they both ended up very rounded and their spine collapsing. I don't fear that, but it's because I live a different lifestyle, and that's what's different about, they were talking about diets, and some of you have been to our office, and we do talk about a menu plan and foods and a diet somewhat, but it's not a 4-letter word, it's more of a diet lifestyle. Diet used to be what we lived on all the time. It wasn't something we short-term went on. So it's a word that's kind of been, changed the meaning of it.
That's part of why we named the book that we wrote, first book, The Trinity Diet. Right below the heading, it says, it's not about a diet, it's about a lifestyle of body, soul, and spirit, balancing lifestyle, balancing body, soul, and spirit.
I remember when we were discussing the title, and we were like going back and forth about this, and we're like, we shouldn't use the word diet, but it was kind of a buzzword. Sometimes you just have diet on a book, and it's going to draw people to come, but we're hoping it just comes back to what the original, text of the word was. It's just what we eat.
Your substance of what you eat.
And going back to the Bible, all of this is the world's documentary, but it's wisdom for all of us, that documentary that we watched. But it's the other thing I think about is, Jesus wasn't going in the direction of the masses or what was popular, was he? I mean, isn't it difficult to kind of now that you have some of the information that you have and know more about how the body works, is it hard to share with people who don't think the same way along that lines? Have any of you found that? It kind of opens you up. I had a friend on Facebook who actually put a cartoon of a cow on her page, and there was a man kneeling and a little boy kneeling, and they were both suckling on the cow. It was kind of but she got so much, it was just kind of just showing that we are humans drinking cow's milk. And it said in there something about you would think it was gross if somebody gave you a glass of breast milk, human breast milk to drink. But we're kind of, doing that with another animal. It's kind of strange. But she took that down off of her Facebook page, and I asked her why, and she said, I got so much attack from putting that up. I was kind of trying to make light of it, by a cartoon and sharing a cartoon, but she had to take it off because she didn't also want food and her beliefs to be a divisive issue. She didn't, really love is the first thing. We want to love on people.
Shrimp cocktails, just devour that stuff. And it's just a very unclean thing, the highest cholesterol containing creature.
Of not the good cholesterol.
Of not the good cholesterol, right. So, and then you see some vultures down here that are cleaning up a dead carcass. And a vulture is a bird, right? Would you rather eat a vulture or some chicken? So why would we eat chicken instead of vulture? Because God said so. And because he made the vulture different than the chicken. The vulture actually produces so much acid in its stomach that it's strong enough to kill the amount of botulism that could kill up to 20 people, 20 to 30 people. But humans couldn't eat that stuff, they would die of botulism. But the vulture can survive because of its acidity level to destroy that bacteria, but a very toxic animal.
And of the clean birds that God said were clean, they all have a gizzard. So if you're wondering if a bird is clean or unclean, do turkeys have gizzards? Yes. Chickens? Yes. Duck? Yes. But
Just better filtration networks. And this is where Amy likes to have, I didn't actually put one on there. Where's the pig? Nobody, some people have eaten gator, but the pig is your favorite discussion because, and I just say this, as Christian believers, as Christ believers, we know Jesus cast devils into 300 pigs and wasted those pigs, and they were all upset with him because on the Sea of Galilee, on the western portion of the sea, it lines Israel, but over on the eastern side is kind of that border into Jordan, and there's a lot of cultures over there that would eat pigs. And so Jesus spent most of his time around the Sea of Galilee there, and so where he was ministering, and that was one opportunity as a teaching tool that, well, he knows there's so many pigs in the earth, and they replicate so fast. He's like, well, I need to put these demons somewhere. We'll just cast them over there into those pigs, no big deal. That farmer's going to reproduce those pigs in about 2 months' time anyway.
And where did they go after that?
They drowned in the lake.
Not the demons.
Yeah, we don't know where the demons went.
They didn't want to go in the pit. That's what he said.
That's right.
there's a great book that I've shared with some of you called God's Key to Health and Happiness. I really recommend that. You have that book, don't you, Kitty? It is a fabulous book talking about these unclean animals and how they've affected people, but the spiritual reference too. And he is very clear in the book, and we want to be clear to say this doesn't mean that we lose our salvation if we eat pork. It does not have anything to do with our salvation.
Amen.
But, and he says in the book, he said, can you eat pork and go to heaven? He says, absolutely. You just might get there sooner. I like how he said that.
So that's why we partake of the clean animals that are listed there in Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14.
What was the conclusion of Dr. Mock's study on clean and unclean animals? Page 8 in your study guide. Toxicity of the Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14 unclean animals was higher than clean animals, confirming these scriptures' reference to be 100% accurate. And that study was done by Johns Hopkins University in 1953.
Every time science tries to either prove or disprove God to be accurate, they can't disprove it. And here's the study. We published it, and the way that they did this study was that they measured the amount of clean meat on the animal. And they could have measured toxic meat, but their focus was on clean, functioning tissue. And you can see on the left-hand side of this chart, from the swine all the way down to the shark and skate, they have lower percentages of clean meat. And then the clean animals on the right-hand side have much higher percentages of clean meat. So focus on what's clean and pure and lovely and just and good, right? Focus on the clean animals, get more of those, and health will come your way. We just don't think on the unclean thing. See a bunny out hopping on down a trail, that's great, he's doing his job, but I'm not supposed to eat rabbit. Maybe if I was in the wilderness and my life was at stake, I would have to do something like that.
Here's my picture.
So Peter had a vision. I love sharing this because Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever, right? So if he said something in the Old Testament, it's beneficial, like hand washing. It's good to wash your hands to get the bacteria off of your hands so that when you eat, you don't get more bacteria in your body because Lord knows we consume a lot as it is. So he has these basic laws that are for our benefit, and in this case, our health benefit. But Peter has a vision in Acts chapter 10, and in this vision, a vessel of unclean animals comes down, and God says to Peter, "Arise, Peter, kill and eat." And Peter was pretty emphatic because it happened 3 times, and each time Peter said the same thing, "No, Lord, I have never eaten anything unclean or impure." So then you think, wow, is maybe the Lord trying to break him of his religiosity or something? It was just known. These were foundational truths that are taught to them since they could first have understanding. We eat clean because it's good for our bodies. They knew that God had a perfect law for the nature of our bodies, and these animals were unclean, were representative of unclean people, unclean hearts. So it was symbolic, just as a vision is symbolic, right? Peter's having a vision. He can't actually kill these animals because they're not real, they're just a vision. So Peter, it says in Acts 10, as you go along further, that he was perplexed by the vision. He didn't know what it meant. So he's asking the Lord, what does it mean? In verse 47, God reveals it to him that he is no longer to call any man unclean or impure. That was when he was to go to Cornelius' house, who was a Gentile, and the gospel then was made available to the Gentiles, which this scripture opened up the door for salvation for all of us in this room, unless anybody's of Jewish descent. I know they aren't. Isn't that cool? So that was the purpose that God did that, to say that you are saved by grace through faith, not being obedient to following the law. But the vision was never eaten. And you'll find that in Scripture. If you have a Scripture that you come to and you're concerned about it and you want to share it, we can talk about it in class.
Speaking of, I want to share a little side story. He was talking about washing hands. How many of you have heard of Dr. Semmelweis? So look him up. He's a real doctor back in the 1700s, I believe it was. And he was working in a hospital, and they found that he was working in the maternity ward. And they were having a problem with women in the maternity ward getting sick and dying. So he started to observe what was happening. And he saw that the doctors that were examining the women in the maternity ward, they had just come from the morgue, and they were, doing autopsies and that type of thing. And then they were coming in and examining the women without washing their hands. So he said, he explained to them, you need to wash your hands, you're carrying, toxins through the blood. And they really gave him a really hard time about it. And he just really insisted, let's do this, let's try this, let's see if this,
Can
will
you
be
imagine?
helpful.
That was a standard practice. They didn't wash their hands going from one patient to the next.
So he
And
was,
it never even thought crossed their mind.
and so he was trying to implement something new in the medical field. So they did what he had said, and no surprise, no problem anymore. Well, then a little time passed, and then there was a problem again in the maternity ward. Women were getting sick again, and so he went back to the doctors. Are you washing your hands after the morgue? Yes, we are. So as he observed again, when they checked one woman who had an infection and then progressed to check the rest of the women, they weren't washing their hands between the patients. Okay, so he said, all right, now you need to wash your hands between every patient. And they basically went ballistic on him and said, this is ridiculous. We're going to be washing our hands all day long. And anyway, long story short, this is a true story. This is actually how hand washing became implemented. But it was 50 years, I believe it was 50 years, after Dr. Semmelweis died in an insane asylum, because he was driven crazy by no one listening to his research. 50 years after he died, they looked at his research and said, this is what we need to be doing. And so it makes you think about the medical field today. If you try to do anything different, like, what was it, the visionary man I'm thinking of who had visions?
Oh, Nostradamus.
Nostradamus, who wanted to treat with the Black Plague with herbs.
And rose petals.
Yes, and they saw him as it was witchcraft.
But he healed thousands of people with the plague.
And they wanted to do bleeding and other.
That's what killed George Washington. Bleeding and mercury treatment.
Mercury's good.
So, page 9 in the study guide, which is also on page 18 in the Trinity Diet book, story about Addison. This isn't actually her face, but this is what she looked like. And the question is asked here, what are the symptoms that Addison experienced after months of being on a vegetarian diet? Overgrowth of yeast, we could see that. We saw the yellowing of her skin and eyes, reduced muscle tissue, and she appeared malnourished.
A lot of protein, but still not gaining muscle mass, like some athletes who are consuming
good
200
point.
grams of.
We had a gentleman
So
who
you
was,
can overconsume protein too.
he was 5'10", 170 pounds, and he was one of those bodybuilders. He wanted to get to 225 at 5'10". He wanted to be a power lifter and get into shows and stuff like that. He was consuming 300 grams of protein a day. And that's what a lot of them do. But all we did was cut it in half, gave him half the amount of protein, improved his digestion, dispersed it more evenly, mixed up the proteins, included other support for hormones and whatnot, and I didn't see him after one visit. And about years later, a friend of his comes in and says, do you remember this guy? And I said, yeah. He goes, man, he's just in amazing shape today, and he just thanks you for all that you did for him. He weighs 225, he competes in these events, and so he achieved what he wanted to achieve, and we just didn't see him anymore. He had quite a drive to the office, so that makes sense.
I would say in America, there's not a problem with people consuming enough protein, because most people are having burgers, processed meats a lot in the day. It's probably their digestion of it, right?
And that's why we call, on our food list, we call the proteins that we want people to consume quality protein. It makes them think, all right, am I getting a quality protein? Is
And
it
in the amount, in the portion that you
proper
can actually
portion that you can
digest,
right?
yeah.
In ratio with carbs and fats. Okay, so sarcopenia we mentioned earlier. This is muscle wasting, page 9, the study guide. What test can help monitor muscle mass loss? And it's a bioimpedance test. Here you see a patient laying down and got the electrodes hooked up to the hands and feet. And it's a great way to monitor toxicity. Basal metabolic rate is calculated. That's how many calories you burn. Your fat mass, both in pounds and percentage of the body that's fat. And then the fat-free mass, which is the lean tissue, is part of the intracellular water. And then extracellular water tells us what kind of a shift is happening if your body is excreting toxins well. And then body mass index, for us, really doesn't have a value. Because of myself being under body mass, or Kelly with all his muscle mass being over body mass. You have to base it on fat mass and where your waters are. So this is the type of device to really understand. You can't just say, okay, I'm this tall, I should weigh this much. Because that guy that was 5'10", that weighed 225, he would be called obese, right? He only had 5% body fat when he got to that point. So very healthy individual. And the more muscle mass you have, the longer you will live.
We've also had people who are actually under body weight, but with this assessment, they are over fat. So they're skinny fat people. That's a concern.
Good point. Thanks for reminding me of that. There was a lady that came in. She's 5'6", 130 pounds. So based on the BMI numbers, that's perfect. A woman at 5 foot tall should be 100, and for every inch over 100, you add 5 pounds. So 5'6", 130. She was clinically obese. She had 39% fat. So we started her on a balanced eating plan, menu plan, and then got her to move, got her to exercise. I just had her to commit to 5 minutes a day, I like to start this, of squats and push-ups. Well, she didn't have the strength to do a push-up on the floor, but I said, well, let's go on a kitchen counter and just do some. Just move a little bit. I want you to try to do 100 of each of those. Do 20 push-ups on the counter, and then go find a chair and squat, and do 20 squats. 1, 2. So she did that for the first week. She said, I felt so good. I went and got a NordiTrack. I like the NordiTrack. I was trying out this equipment. I started to do that. She comes back in 6 weeks, and she went, her weight was still 130, but her body fat went from 39 to 25% fat. Nearly perfect in 6 weeks' time, and she was close to 60 years of age. So the body heals, but we've got to do to it what it needs to get done. We were meant to move.
Yeah. And that which gets tested or assessed gets better. So if we do this functional test regularly with our clients and ourselves, so we can see that we're progressing and getting to where we want to be.
You can do a test at home every single day. It's called a scale. And you don't get phobic about it, but I get on the scale every day, and you want to know why? I want to know that eating that chicken yesterday, how did that affect me based on the salt level of what was in it? I can tell what it does to my body. And so that's going to tell me what kind of discipline am I going to have the next day. Because when you see that number, it's going to mess with your psyche. You're going to go, you know what, I'm going to be a little bit more reserved today, right? I want to make sure I drink my water. So it's a simple test.
No matter what, I'm not going to do what he does. He weighs himself at night with clothes on. I mean, no.
So the calcium protein matrix and bone health is one of the topics in chapter 3 in the Trinity Diet. And page 10 in the study guide, we're asking this question: what do proteins provide for bone health? They provide the structure for minerals such as calcium, magnesium, boron, zinc, molybdenum, and so forth to bind to, like in concrete, a reinforcement preventing cracks or break. So in concrete you have that rebar that prevents the concrete from flexing and cracking. And you can see that there in the bone structure, and those fibers, those protein fibers, that are mixed in with the minerals that give the bone the flexibility. I was working, this is one of my blunders in life, I love telling this story. I take my 15-foot ladder and I put it up on a huge pine tree that we had in our property out in Leona. Well, it's got so big that the branches are really long and they're hanging down too close to the ground. So I'm driving the mower and getting hit with the tree. So I'm going to trim this off. So the branch is coming out here and I rest my ladder. It's going up above it a little bit. And I climb up, tree trunks over here, and I climb up the ladder. I get my chainsaw, cut off this end of the tree, and it weighed so much with all the pine cones on it, the branch went like that.
Over where the
So I'm 12 feet in the air. Landed, bam! And just got a little bruise on my bottom, but many people could have broken something, right? Broken a hip or flexibility of the muscles and the bones should be able
They
to.
were there to catch you.
I was not scared. I probably wouldn't have let you do that.
Yes.
Right.
God has angels. Definitely. So the calcium protein matrix in bone health, page 10 in the study guide. Milk produces, or milk products lack the proper form of calcium, as Amy brought to our attention. They actually refortify it with an improper form to be adequately absorbed into the body. And people who use milk and some of these hormones that they give you, these estrogenic hormones, actually cause your bone to absorb more calcium and it makes it more brittle. The calcium that's there is more brittle. So those studies have revealed that now. There are more than 25 different proteins in milk that humans can't digest. And there's a picture of that milking machine, and you see the infection around the udder of the animal. Page 10 in the study guide, where can more details and research on the effects of milk on the human body be found on the web? Notmilk.com. Important research to do. Now, just for a second, I have to tell a story about my oldest daughter, Shauna, who's 30. Shauna actually loved milk, but at age 5, when we really got this revelation 25 years ago, that we weren't going to drink milk, we weren't going to partake of some of the things that the world was partaking of. So we switched to rice milk. That was our main source of milk. We liked rice milk. There's other milks, but we liked it.
Back then, it was the only option.
It was the most enjoyable because it's a little sweeter. And so we have our cereal in the morning with that. And so Shauna goes at age 5 and she does her first overnight with her friend Sarah. And a week later, Shauna and I are at the kitchen table having cereal in the morning, reading, and she said, "Daddy, remember when I spent the night at Sarah's house?" I said, "Yeah, I do." She said, "We had regular milk on our cereal." It was gross. Those are her words. It was gross. And she was hard to convert from regular milk to rice milk. But her body became accustomed, loved the rice milk, and then when your body's cleaner and healthier, later it goes, this stuff's gross. It really is.
Interesting, our kids didn't ever break any bones or
Or
have
have
cavities.
dental problems.
Young.
Not at all. Yeah, the calcium that's in, for example, sesame seeds, 1 tablespoon of sesame seeds, 300 milligrams of calcium citrate is easily absorbed even better than meeting your minimum daily required of 1,500 milligrams of improper forms of calcium. And absorbs much better. So neurotransmitters, these come from your central nervous system. They control mood, they help with motivation, they help with sleep, and they fire the neurons to the heart, and they're a busy involvement constantly. The question is asked on page 10 of the study guide. Or stated, thank you, honey. All neurotransmitters for the nervous system are formed from amino acids. Amino acids. These are the building blocks of proteins. And this is where we get this terminology. You heard it in school. We all heard it. We were taught this. The essential amino acids. The 8 essential amino acids. We need certain amino acids in our diet. Important. Protease of first importance.
On page 11 of the study guide, some causes for an underactive thyroid are not enough protein, a high-stress lifestyle, poor digestion, and nutritional deficiencies of supportive nutrients such as iodine, zinc, selenium, B12, and B6.
Zinc is removed in processing of grains. Some of the life source of the food is removed so that when they put it on the shelf, it won't mold, it won't decay, right? It's for storage, it's for profitability. Nutrition is last on the list for processed foods. We have to eat foods that have these nutrients in them, and those are the foods that will rot and spoil and decay. We just got to eat them before they do that, right? But zinc is a key element in converting thyroid hormones, and Houstonians are notoriously deficient in zinc. Why that is because we have a large population, and we have a lot of environmental hydrocarbons that are rich in cadmium. Cadmium is a heavy metal. You can test your hair and measure a hair analysis, and you're probably going to show that the environment has caused your body to accumulate cadmium, where you can bind and excrete cadmium with zinc. So the zinc you're getting in your diet is probably inadequate to do the job of chelating or binding and excreting. And it goes out through urine and out through feces, so we really need to replenish with zinc, selenium, B12, B6. B12 has been deficient for many years. That's why they were given B12 injections more than 50 years ago. B12 is hard to assimilate in the body. So,
Although an injection is not how we were meant to be assimilating B12. In fact, I had a client come in for colon hydrotherapy because, well, part of his restorative process, he had gotten a B12 shot. Did they give him in the hip or the leg? Hip.
yeah.
He got an infection at the site of the shot. So, you know, you're piercing skin, you're leaving an opening for a possibility of infection if your immunity isn't high. So the best place to absorb B12 is?
Through saliva.
Right, under the tongue. So that's where you see some liquid or sublingual B12s and
Leave it there as long as possible. So you see iodine on the list there. Where do we get iodine? Mostly from sea vegetation, seaweed. One summer, I was 5 pounds lighter than I am now because Whole Foods went in over at the wedding, and I started going there, and I was buying these seaweed snacks. And so I'm eating seaweed every day. I'm just addicted to this new little treat, right? and I just keep losing weight. My weight got really down to a lean, actually the weight I was when I exited high school, which was about 5 pounds lighter than I am now. And so I'm trying to figure out how did that happen? I didn't do anything different that I could figure out. And that's all I could figure that happened. So I've since cut out a little bit of that from my diet because I was eating so much of that. But here's the thing about iodine. Iodine is necessary to make thyroid hormones. How many of you have heard the term T3 or T4, right? What's that? Do you know what that number means? Thyroid hormone number 3 has 3 iodine molecules hooked to it. Thyroid T4 has 4 iodine molecules connected to it. So iodine is a key element that we have to make thyroid hormone. Well, you've heard of the term goiter. There are chemicals in our environment that are goitrogenic. They cause goiter-like activity. You may never see a goiter on yourself, but you're having a goiter activity every time you get in a shower and you let chlorinated water absorb through your skin by showering in chlorinated water, because chlorine is in that row right under iodine of goitrogen chemicals. And bromine, what they bleach white bread with, and pastas and cereals, and fluoride or fluorine. So those toxic chemicals that are prevalent in our society, in our food processing, and in our water supply are poisoning us and depleting our iodine and causing America to struggle with their ability to even stay at their ideal weight. So we really want to keep up on our iodine consumption and then try to stay away from those things that are goitrogenic.
This thyroid disease is pretty rampant,
It is.
thyroid issues.
And then many will just take the thyroid hormone. The danger of taking a hormone of any kind, until you understand how the body chemistry makes its own hormones. Hormone comes from the Greek word, which means to urge on. It's a powerful signaling agent, and the amount of molecules in your body are like 1 to the billionth or trillionth of a gram. It's a tiny little amount that these glands are sending out into the bloodstream that have powerful urge-on effects to our system. When we start randomly taking these massive amounts of hormones, we don't know how our body is going to respond to that. It's very confusing to the body. So if we give these glands what they need, their nutrients, they will produce the hormones. We've seen miraculous things in that regard. So how many glands require adequate nutrition to produce a hormone? All of them. Every single one. So cancer and protein loss, why don't you?
Page 11 of the study guide again, the common denominator in most of my clients with cancer is a very serious protein deficiency.
Protein is used in the body to make globulin proteins, to make antibodies, to make enzymes to digest food. It's just so important for functions to keep life together. Hey, yes, Kelly?
Is that a trailing indicator, you think, the protein deficiency in the cancer patient? In other words, is the cancer first or the protein deficiency first?
It's definitely worse as a trailing cause of the treatment. It makes it worse, but we see it even in the initial stages as they're coming into cancer. You see that happen.
So it could be, again, that they're not digesting their proteins, or not consuming quality
Right,
proteins.
But that comment is a good one because the treatments cause people, number one, to lose their hunger. And it was interesting that they allowed marijuana on the scene in some states, because marijuana really helps people not to feel nauseous and really increase their appetite. One patient came in and said, I would have not lost my wife if marijuana was legal in Texas, because when she got under treatment, she wouldn't eat. She had no appetite. She had stomach ulcers and stomach ailment. He said, and I know that that's used to treat all that, and we could have survived it. So it's an herb, and it has some of those benefits. Of course, you could have done other things besides that, but that's one of the treatments they're using now, is legalizing that herb. Critical testing. Protein and amino acid levels, page 11 in the study guide. Diets that are rich in quality proteins have the ability to provide adequate amino acids. There was an amino acid therapy that was done with a group of elderly in a retirement home. And these were patients who were under treatment too. And so the doctors let them use and do this. Well, hey, these are just proteins. We want to give amino acids to the patients. And many of these patients were able to leave the retirement home, get back functioning, get back to work. And so they stopped the study because it was taking away business from the organization that allowed it to be done. So amino acids are pretty powerful. They just basically, they take and pre-digest them in the food, so that when you consume them, they rapidly assimilate into the body, and they either make the thyroid hormone or help your digestion. So we use a lot of free-form amino acids. And at nutritionhealthcenter.com, and I'll send you the research on that, so that you can get a non-GMO organic soy and consume it every day of your life, like I have since 2006, and it helps with body composition and helps immunity, does so many wonderful things. So,
And especially the fermented soys that have
Yes.
the good bacteria for the immune system.
sprouting is another good method to do with anything that's a seed or a bean, and there's more life in the food and easier to digest that way. So what is the amount of protein a person needs per day based on what is the formula question? Page 12 in the study guide. So this is a way one of many ways that you can calculate your need for protein in grams a day. You take that lean body mass from your bioimpedance test, your fat-free mass. And Kelly doesn't mind I use his example because he has so much muscle mass. A standard protein serving for him would need to be larger for him to reach his muscle mass quantity in a day, and he would just eat those 5 or 6 times a day. But you multiply it too by your activity factor, and the activity factor is, you know, how much movement you're getting in a day. I'm about to do some moving this afternoon with my son, working in the permaculture garden, so I'll be back inside every couple hours, getting a nourishing beverage and eating more food. So that, by using the lean body mass or the fat-free numbers, multiplying it times your activity factor, there you get your daily protein requirements in grams per day. And there's a calculation there. Actually, that's based on close to what mine is. 125 pounds of my body is lean mass, muscle mass, organ, bones, multiplying it times an activity factor of 0.8, and it gives you a guideline in that book, to tell you about that. And so I need about 100 grams a day. And that was our last question. We got time for questions.
Susan?
Can you just share with them when you were talking about the chemicals that come through the water, some things they can do to help prevent that? Like when showering and things like that?
Yes. You want to shower in some of the streams in the mountains in Colorado. We use a filter, but we have well water. Comes out of a well, it goes through a filter. Comes up to the house, goes through another filter. It goes through a pH balancing device, and then another filter comes into the house, and then it's filtered at the refrigerator, and that's what we drink. But then, you know, it's filtered multiple times.
But then if you're not able to do that,
you just find a good filter. Or some people use it on their shower head.
you can. I would definitely recommend if you shower to invest in a good shower filter that gets the chlorine out at least. And that will really help your immune system a lot.
Remember when our son moved, he was up at Christ for the Nations in Dallas, going to school for a couple of years. And he moved into an apartment after he finished his first year, and we moved in that apartment, and I was first one to turn the sink on, and we were doing some cleaning up, and I was like, whoa, I mean, the odor of that water coming out of the city, it's like, that's more than chlorine. I mean, it's just stinky smell. So I just went down to the closest convenience store that had filters, and I stuck a filter up on that faucet. It was like a $29 filter. And that water was so clean tasting and took away the smell. I mean, it's amazing with just charcoal filters, how they filter out like 99% of all the junk. So don't worry about how perfect your filter is. Just get a filter and filter what you're drinking and eating.
So I would highly recommend not drinking your water from plastic bottles. So environmentally, it is disturbing to me every time I go to Costco to see all of the plastics that we're all
People
using.
bringing cases of plastic bottles and then trashing that and going into landfills. That didn't exist back when we grew up. The water coming out of the tap was better than what's in there because that's tap water that's filtered, and we don't know how often those companies change their filters. But you can control the changing of your own filter and get a good stainless steel container so that bisphenol plastic that's estrogenic that causes cancer, the studies have proven that, and yet they still allow that to be sold. It's crazy, isn't it? Aren't you glad you're an example?
It's okay. We've all done it. And you know the other thing too, if it means that we wouldn't drink any water, drink that water. Originally it was, this bottled water was for convenience, but so here's my water bottle. Stainless steel is great, but also this is hard plastic, and the bottom will say BPA free if it's a safe plastic. This
you
one.
can actually step on these things.
Can I step on
it? Okay.
No.
All right, let's just
No.
But it is a hard plastic. And so I fill this at home, and it's also a good way to calculate how much I need. I know I need at least 2 of these per day. And most gyms, if you're a member at a gym, most of them have some purified water you can refill your bottle with there. So take advantage also of wherever you're at. I mean, when we travel and we've been in hotels, and we always like to go where they have a nice gym. We check their gym out, and we do actually use the gym, but they always have the water containers, and we take advantage of filling our water bottles up every day that we're there. We use the gym's water.
Sometimes we have not used the gym. Why would you think maybe we didn't use the gym?
Because we went outside.
Yes. We went outside because the gym had chemicals that they were cleaning with, and the smell was really strong. And they had fluorescent lighting that was so intense, and we wanted natural light.
There was one gym that it was so toxic with whatever they were cleaning. I'm thinking, I'm coming into the gym and I'm gonna get sick by exercising. It was terrible. We had to go outside.
Yeah, use essential oil scents in your cars. Don't use any kind of chemical sprays. Use essential oils. There's over 1,000 references in the Bible to essential oils, to oils of many types. And we'll get to that in 2 more weeks, but next week, chapter 4, we're going to go into sugars, carbohydrates, Jesus, our bread of life. It's one of the most enjoyable times.
We have a little bit more time to
Yes, we
even
do.
say, one of the, I know that we had talked about that sometimes people say eating healthy can be very expensive, but when we think of, Susan has shared even with her family that when they got rid of the junk and started eating healthier, they were more full on the whole foods, so they ate less of the packaged foods, because you could eat a package of potato chips and not feel full. But anyway, so economizing. So a lot of these cleaning products that are alternative or healthy are expensive, aren't they? But you can clean your house with what? White vinegar, with borax. Borax is, you could scrub your sinks and your toilets with borax. You can use, some of the essential oils they talked about. That's a great way to economize and not spend a lot of money on it, because some of those things can cost a lot if you're gonna do all of those. And Taylor, you guys made your own soap, didn't you? That's fantastic and very inexpensive, I'll bet, right? So those are some ways to economize. Any other
Time for some more questions.
It's a little off topic, but can you talk a little bit about coffee?
Good. Coffee is a big subject. We used to be so against coffee completely, mainly because people are drinking non-organic, and there's a lot of chemicals involved that cause kidney problems, that overstimulate the autonomic nervous system. So caffeine in mild doses before exercise can be beneficial. If you're not exercising, then take coffee out of the equation. It overstimulates the heart. So we do meridian testing at the office, and it measures 12 major organ systems, and one of them is the heart. People that are on coffee who are not exercising always have heart excess. It's going to cause rapid heartbeat, sometimes a regular heartbeat. The acidity of coffee then requires more minerals to neutralize it. So we utilize a coffee that has some other things blended with it on occasions, but we don't drink it all the time, just special occasions on the weekends and definitely before activity, exercise. So they did some studies. Most of the studies you saw, a lot of the people relying on coffee are people that are in adrenal fatigue. So I need something to get me going. Cocaine might help too, but it's not legal, so you probably don't want to use that. So that overstimulation, they're just constantly kicking their body. It's kind of like whipping a horse to get it to go, instead of letting the horse rest, nourish the horse, and get it prepared for race day. And so we're whipping ourselves, and it causes adrenal fatigue. And we see that. We do the blood pressure, Raglan test. There's all kinds of adrenal tests that we do. And individuals' adrenals get restored, and they go, you know what, I don't feel like I need the coffee now. I do it on occasions. And that's where we live, is we nourish our adrenals with many of the adaptogenic herbs that help the body to have that energy that you want. And there's hundreds of those. They're so beneficial.
Most people that are drinking coffee regularly are not sleeping well either. And I can attest that we were not coffee drinkers. And that was, you know, we recommended that, we still recommend that people don't drink coffee. Do we periodically? Yes. But I can, when we became familiar with a pH balanced coffee and we started using that a little bit, I started to get addicted to coffee. Even though it was a healthier coffee, I still got addicted to coffee. Every morning I wanted that coffee. It still gave me that little boost. And so, but I always ended up feeling later the crash effect from it. So the other thing that I noticed, and as I've gotten older, I've had a little bit of inflammatory issues now and then. And I had hurt my knee, and if I even had 1 cup of coffee in the morning, hydrated well all day, ate super good all day, I could almost be sure the next day that my knee would feel a little achier. I didn't sleep well that night. The body does have to, like you say, buffer that acidity, and it buffers that acidity by robbing mineral stores from your bone, from other source, you know, places in the body. So it's a challenge, definitely, to not. Dr. Joel Robbins explained it this way: 120 milligrams of coffee in your bloodstream would actually kill you. So how do we survive by drinking all of this caffeine? He said, your body, when you're drinking it, is sensing, this is what he said, it senses it's being poisoned. So what happens? The adrenal glands rev up, the body, that's why we feel good. The body revs up to do what? To get this poison out of the body as soon as it can. That's how he explained it. He said the body's being poisoned, it's going to rev to get out. And then he says what happens is, as we get into adrenal burnout, what happens? We need maybe 2 cups of coffee now to get what we had before, because our adrenals are getting, he said it was like kicking a dead dog. You know, you're trying to kick something that's getting weaker and weaker, those adrenal glands. And so our adrenal glands are already stressed enough by so many other things. So,
well, the topic of caffeine, though, babe, is that the caffeine is in the natural food that God created in very small amounts in its natural form. But when man refines it and he potentizes it, then we get such higher amounts and we get that overstimulation. So, like, for example, what's interesting about Chinese green tea has a much lower level of caffeine in it. You don't feel that overbuzz from it like you would from coffee. And it also has an amino acid in it called theanine, I believe, which has a calming effect on your central nervous system. So you don't feel just buzzed out of place, and your heart doesn't overactivate from it. So it's finding that right balance for each of us, how to make all this work and still enjoy the things that we enjoy.
It is. So do I still periodically have a cup of coffee? Yeah. But not when I'm hurting. If I'm feeling really good, I've been exercising good, I've been eating well, hydrating well, my joints are feeling well, then I might have a cup once a week or once every couple weeks. But what happens even when I have it that one day is then the next day I'm like, maybe I'll just have another. You know, maybe 2 days in a row is not too bad. Decaf's not
if it's water decaffeinated, what they call the Swiss decaffeination process is the only safe process. Other processes use chemicals to decaffeinate, and then you get more chemicals, which are more damaging than the caffeine itself. So.
But yes.
Do you just drink black coffee?
When I do have it, I use Ultrameal as my creamer.
Okay.
And stevia.
Vanilla with stevia.
Have you done that?
A little cinnamon, so we
Yeah.
make it more of a meal instead of just a coffee stimulant.